Hi, my name is Jacob Allen, aka You Said It Chewy on social media. And in this video series, we're going to build an app using SwiftUI. If you want to follow along, you can get the source code for this video series on my website. And if you're just getting started programming, I have a bundle that includes source code for these videos plus 2 micro courses. A Swift for Beginners micro course to help you get started with Swift, plus a Git for Beginners micro course to introduce you to version control, a concept that every programmer needs to know. All of this is available at my site, yousaiditchewy.com. Now, let's build an app with SwiftUI. We're going to take a look at where we're going first, and then we'll dive right into starting to build it out. So in this tutorial series, we're going to build out an app called Rock and Roll Paper Scissors. Now, Rock and Roll Paper Scissors is almost identical to Rock Paper Scissors, but we just add a little bit of rock and roll to it. So what we're looking at here is an app completely made with SwiftUI. We have 2 different views that we're going to be working with. We have this initial introduction view, and then when you click into it, it'll take us into our actual game view. Let me show you what that looks like. So here we have our initial view. This is what you see when the screen or when the app loads. It says, would you like to play Rock and Roll Paper Scissors? I guess so. So let's click I guess so and see what happens. Great, so we got a little Space Invader, and that's our opponent. So we're going to be playing a game of rock, paper, scissors against our opponent. Let's just see what happens when we start to play. So let's play rock right here. I played rock, our Space Invader played hand, which is paper, so paper beats rock. I lost. So let's play again. We tied, so he played hand again. I guess he's into playing the paper. I played paper as well, so we tied. Let's see what happens if I can win a game. I'm just going to keep clicking until I win. Oh my goodness, please let me win. Please let me win. Is what happens when you're working with random numbers. I won. Okay, so paper beats rock. Excellent. Now let's see what happens if we add a little bit of rock and roll to it. Ooh, that is super cool. So we got the same rules applying to our game, but we're just playing with different icons. So singer beats guitar, guitar beats drums, drums beats singer. Just like rock, paper, and scissors. Okay, so let's see what we get. I played drums, and the opponent played the guitar, so I lost. Let me play tie game. Okay, I played singer. Let me try to win with the singer. Can I win? Can the singer ever win? Let's try this. I lost to the drums. Always got to lose to the drummer. Come on. I won. Okay, so I beat drums with guitar. Sweet. As you can see, this is a really simple app. There's not a lot that you can do with it, but it has some features that are a little more advanced above just playing a rock, paper, scissors app. But here's the deal. Giving yourself an assignment like this where it's very simple and it's very clear as to how you interact with it, those are the best types of apps or games to build early on, because just about anyone can tell you how to play rock, paper, scissors. It's not a complicated game, and the interactions that are happening, I'm just clicking on a button that has text in it, and then the opponent plays an icon as well. These are very simple interactions, just enough to get your feet wet with programming, and then at the end you have something that you can interact with. So we are going to actually start with the functionality that happens when you start to click these. As you're building applications, there's a couple different ways you can approach it. Well, there's several ways you can approach it. 2 of the more common ways are you start with your logic and then you work your way towards the interaction. So that would be like starting with the code behind the scenes that's going to run when you start to click, and then starting to code the buttons that you actually click that will call these functions or run these programs. That's the approach that we're going to take in this video for now. The alternative is if you wanted to just build out the UI, the user interface, that's one approach that you could do, where I'm just going to like start putting placeholder copy in here. I'm going to start putting like a placeholder icon, placeholder buttons that don't do anything when you click them. That's perfectly fine as well. And then later you would come back and assign functionality to these interactions. So That's not what we're going to do. We're actually going to start coding a program that will run behind the scenes when we click these buttons. And we are going to do this with a Swift playground. So I have Xcode open already. If you don't have Xcode open, go ahead and open it. In my other screen here is where I have my navigation. So I'm just going to click File, and then I'm going to click New Playground. Okay, it's going to give me this playground dialog. So if you can't see what I just did, you would click File, New, and I clicked Playground. That's how I got this screen here. And we're going to use iOS and blank, so everything that it gives us by default, we're just going to choose that. We'll click Next. I'm going to call this Game Playground, and we are going to save it. We're going to save it in my super secret location, my desktop. Right, so if you've been following along with my Swift for Beginners micro course, this will all look familiar to you. You have your file structure over here, and we have a terminal down here. And then this is our area where we can write code. I'm going to open up this side as well, just so we can kind of see everything that's going on. This is some metadata around the file that we're working with. Not very important. We're not going to be messing with that. We're going to be spending most of our time here in the canvas where we're writing our code, and then down here in the terminal. So if you've been following along with my Swift for Beginners, you'll know that we're assigning, like right when you get Swift Playground up and running, it has a variable called str that gets assigned the value hello playground. That's pretty cool, and that you get a little bit of placeholder to work with. But we're just going to go ahead and delete that. We are going to make our function that runs when you click play, when you click one of the icons to play a game. So I'm going to call this func play game. Play Gabe. I guess we're playing Gabe. And we can name our parameters. I'm going to name it with hand. And this is going to take a, actually let's do this. I'm going to get a little bit advanced. I'll walk you through this when I get done writing it, but we'll just go ahead and write this for the sake of writing it. All right, now I'm going to drop a comment just so that Swift doesn't bark at me. Check it out. So we have declared our function play game. Now here's a cool concept that you can do with Swift. I wish you could do this in other languages like JavaScript or Ruby, but Swift allows you to have an external named parameter and an internal named parameter. This is a little bit of an advanced topic, so if you're new to programming, don't feel like if you don't know this you're not a good programmer. This is something you can worry about later. But when we are writing the function, we can call it play game with hand and then pass in an integer. And then when we are inside the function writing our code, which we're about to do, we can refer to this parameter as player hand. And then the player hand is going to be strongly typed to an integer. We have to accept an integer. And this function is not going to return anything. It's going to return void. So we are not going to pass any data outside of this function. We only are going to pass data into the function. So let's do this. So if we think about what needs to happen when you're playing rock, paper, scissors, so we're going to assume that it's a one-player game. I'm going to be the only one playing with my phone, and I'm going to be able to select a player hand, so rock, paper, or scissors. And then on the other side, the computer is also going to pick a hand. Now, there's several different ways that you can kind of interpret this logic into code, but the way that makes the most sense for me is by comparing numbers. So if you follow along with my Swift for Beginners tutorial or micro course, you will remember that arrays are a really good way to handle lists, and they start with the 0 index. I think an array is a great way to handle a user input. So, or a great way to handle how we're going to compare these hands to each other. So first things first, here's what we're going to go for, okay? Here's what we're working towards. I want to be able to take an array, and the first index is going to be my player hand. So we can just say player hand, and then the second index is going to be a computer hand. Okay? And for those of you who are brand new to programming, what you're seeing right here is called pseudocode. It's going to look a little bit like code, it's going to feel a little bit like code, but it is not actual code that will run. This is just so that we can conceptualize and visualize the code that we're going to work towards. So now if I have a player hand and a computer hand, I can compare that to winning hands. So let's say var winning hands equal, and this is winning hands from the perspective of me, the player. So if I win, let's say we have, if I play rock and the opponent plays, what does rock be? Scissors? Okay, that's a winning hand. Check it out. That's the first hand. And as you can see, I'm starting to get, I realized I need an actual array of arrays that have strings or something in them. So the first index is going to be my first winning hand. That's going to be rock and scissors. If I play rock and the opponent plays scissors, I win. If I play paper and the opponent plays rock, I win again. And if the opponent plays, or let's see, if I play scissors and the opponent plays paper, I win. So check out this syntax. This is, again, pseudocode, but it's going to resemble some of the actual code that we'll write. So our first index of this array is going to be rock and scissors. This represents a hand that I've played against a hand that the opponent has played. So these are only winning hands that are going into this array. And this is going to help us be able to determine if the hand that we have, or if like the game result that we've come up with is a winning hand for me or a winning hand for the computer. All right, if that doesn't make sense, it will as we keep trucking along. So what would we want to represent these this rock and scissors in a way that we can not only determine, like we can not only pick a hand ourselves, but also we can randomly generate a play from the computer. The easiest way to accomplish random play would be if we have something that could generate a random number. Luckily for us, Swift gives you a random number generator. So let's write a function. I'm going to step outside of this function real quick. We'll say func get random number between 0 and 2. Okay, here's why. Here's why we're doing between 0 and 2. So if I have rock, paper, scissors, watch this. Rock, paper, scissors. Okay? If this is an array, my rock is the 0 index, paper is the 1 index, scissors is the 2 index. So between 0 and 2, I need a number between 0 and 2. So that's why we're going to make a function that gets a random number between 0 and 2. Watch how easy this is. I'm going to return, I'm going to learn how to spell return, and then I'm going to type it, and it's going to be an int. So within the types, like the primitive types, like an int, there are methods that you can call on it. And we're just going to call this method. If you can see Swift kind of auto guessing what I'm gonna do, those can really help you out. Sometimes they can get you in a lot of trouble, but sometimes they can be really helpful. See here. Look at this. Unexpected non-void return value in a void function. So I just returned a number. Okay, I just returned an integer. But when I was writing my code, I said that it's going to return void. And that's actually, Swift did me a favor right there. It's right. I need to return an int, not void. So very quickly, I have this function that can get a random number between 0 and 2. We're going to run this real quick. So I'm going to do print, and then I'm going to type get random number between 0 and 2. I'm just tabbing to let it autocomplete, and Xcode's tabbing it for me. So let's run this and see what I get. Waiting, waiting. 2. Okay, the first time you run it, it takes a little bit, but then as you run it more and more, it's a lot faster. Let's do it again. Let's see if we get a random number. 0. Let's run it again. Let's see if we get a random number. Let's do this. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it. Let's see how many different numbers we get. We should be able to get a total of 3 different numbers. So we have a 0, a 1, and a 2. So we know that this is giving us a random number between 0 and 2. This is a great way for us to pick a player hand, okay, or a computer's hand. So let's say I'm playing against a computer. This function is how we're going to get our computer's hand. So here we have a function that will return us a number, and we can call that function from inside this function. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of space. Again, this is our pseudo code. We're just going to kind of leave it there for a visual. And I'm going to say let computer hand equal get random number between 0 and 2. And again, I just tabbed and let it complete for me. Great. Let's see, initialization of immutable value. What is this telling us? So this is saying initialization of immutable value, computer hand never used. Consider replacing it with probably a variable or an underscore. I think it's trying to tell us to use the underscore syntax. Xcode's getting ahead of us. We haven't used it yet, so it's saying, hey, you need to use this. Well, no duh. We're going to use it. Okay, so let's keep moving. So if you notice up here, we have play with hand, player hand, and we're taking an integer. So why don't we go ahead and just start using this? We'll just print it. We'll say print. And if you follow along with my Swift for Beginners micro course, you'll know all about string interpolation, which is what we're going to do right now. We'll do you played, and then we're going to interpolate our player hand here. You played, and the computer played, and then we're going to interpolate again, and we're going to say computer hand. Check this out. Now what we can do is call our play game function. We're going to print. Actually, we don't need to print. We'll just call the play game function because we're printing inside of it. So we'll do play game. Check it out. It autofilled for us with hand. So I'm playing a game with a hand, and I can pass it an integer. And I know that it's going to require one between 0 and 2. So I'll just put 0 here. Let's see what we get. You played a 0, and the computer played a 0. So if we were going to keep score, this would be a tie, wouldn't it? Let's see what happens if I do it again with a different number. I could put any number in here because we haven't decided what to do with it yet. We're just printing what's passed into it. Okay, so we'll just leave that right there. Print play game with hand 2. It's just going to print you played 2, and the computer played whatever the computer plays. Every time I run this, the computer will get a different hand because of our random number between 0 and 2 function. So every instance of the time this gets ran, it's going to be a different number, which is awesome. It's exactly what we want. All right, now let's set up some winning hands, because here's where we're going to go. We're going to compare what we played to what the computer played with a winning hands array. And I like this array scenario here. I'll show you why. Var winning hands equals. Something cool you can do, much like you can in any other language, is you can kind of break the line. And this is still an array, but it makes it a little bit more clear if I start writing what's inside the array here. So this is going to be an array of arrays, just like what we see here. Okay. And instead of calling it rock, scissors, paper, rock, scissors, paper, I'm just going to put numbers in here. So let's see if we have rock, scissors. That is, let's say that rock is our 0 and scissors is our 2. Okay, so a winning hand would be 0 and 2. That would represent rock and scissors. Okay, so then my next hand is going to be paper, rock, what we have here. So if we're doing 0 1, and 2, okay, this would be a 1 and a 2. That doesn't make sense. Rock, scissors, 0, 1, 1, 2. Rock does beat scissors. Yep. Okay, cool. So let's just do paper. So it's our 1 and, oh, paper beats rock. Okay. So that's a 1 and 0. Then we're going to have our scissors, which beats paper. So this will be 2 and then 1. Okay, here's how we get this. Rock is our 0. Okay. And then scissors is our 2. So rock beats scissors. That's in our winning hands array. Okay. Paper is 1. Paper beats rock, which is our 0. So 1 beats 0. Okay. And then scissors beats paper. So this is our 2 and this is our 1. 2 and our 1. And we're putting our hands first. Okay. So we're going to assume that the first one is going to be us that's playing. So this is a winning hand from our perspective. If I click rock, I want to know that I'm going to beat scissors. Okay. So we'll have a little bit of conditional logic in here. If winning hands, so we're going to use our array, and there's a method on the array called contains, okay? And then we can just put in an explicit variable here that says player hand, okay, which is an integer, and computer hand, which is also an integer. And then if it's a winning hand, we're going to return, or we're going to print you win, right? And then we'll get out of this because I guess we could just do an else statement. Let's just do an else statement. Why not? Okay, else print I get confused with, or I get my JavaScript and Swift tangled up. With JavaScript, you use single quotes. With Swift, you like to use double quotes. You lose. Okay. Let's see what we get here. Let's just run this, and we're going to play. Okay, so I played a 2, which is scissors, and the computer played a 0, which is rock, so I lose. So that is accurate. Let's do it again and see what we get. Let's see if we can get a different one. So we played the exact same hand. Sometimes these random numbers like to get hung up on one of them. So that one was a tie, which is a case that we haven't accounted for yet. Oh, this is cool. So here's how we do this. This is a cool concept. So what I can do is let's walk through this. So if winning hand contains player hand and computer hand, I win. Okay. So else print you lose. But there's actually a third outcome of our game here, and this is a tie game. So why don't we do this? What I like to do is when I'm writing code, I like to have a very clear flow. So let's do let's have our happy path be the first one, and you know that kind of touches on architecture design. When I'm designing, or when I'm architecting for the web, we do this thing called a short circuit, where a short circuit would be, instead of having all these if-else statements, we would do like if let's just say player hand equals equal, so we're comparing it to the computer hand. If these are the same thing, we would print tie game, and then we would return out of it. Okay, so returning out of it is a way of saying, when we're in this function, if this line of code runs, we're going to get out of the function with a return. So return will take you out of the function and stop it. And you can also, when you stop running the function, you can also hand data outside of the function if you need to. So like I can have this return a string, and I could return tie game, and then I would be able to use that somewhere else in my program. But that's not what we need to do right now. We're just going to do what's called a short circuit. We're just going to get out of there. I'm going to return this as it was. So if this line of code runs, it's going to say print tie game. It's going to take us out of the function. Okay. Let's see what we get here, and I can kind of refactor it to make it make a little bit more sense. Check it out. I played it too, and the computer played it too, so it was a tie game. So this block ran, and it got us right out. It didn't run this at all, which is very cool. So I don't know if that's a common practice in Swift like it is with JavaScript, but for your information, that is called a short circuit or an early return. Okay, so that's a good keyword if you want to look it up and look it up on the interwebs, find out some more sample code. So this, in a nutshell, is effectively the function that we're going to run when we click a button. And we'll have to go a little bit further to hook it up into our application. But for all intents and purposes, we have our three outcomes when you click click a button and select a hand to play. You can tie the game. So if our hand is the same as the computer hand, that would be a tie game. We have a winning case where if we play a hand that we have defined in our winning hands array, then we win. Else, we lose and the computer wins. So I'm going to refactor this to make it look just a little bit prettier. I really like this pattern because it's a little bit more declarative than like a long if-else block. So I'm going to refactor this to be a series of short circuits. And I also like my happy path to be at the bottom. Actually, it makes sense for our losing to be at the bottom because it's the only one that does not have a logical statement tied to it. I'll show you what I mean by that. So here is how this works. So short circuit, early return. This is our tie game outcome. Okay, this is our winning outcome. I'll capitalize. I'll stay consistent for you. Okay, and then this is our losing game outcome. All right, so long story short, we're going to call this function that takes a number. We're going to also set a variable inside our function that is a random number between 0 and 2. Okay, and then we're going to quickly print what we played versus what the computer played. If our hands are the same, if the player hand is the same as the computer hand, we're going to print tie game, and then we're going to return out of the function because we're done. If this does not get called, we're going to have a winning game outcome, which is our winning hands. It's basically checking to see if our winning hands array contains an element that looks exactly like this. And again, these are numbers that we've defined in our winning hands arrays. Okay? So if this gets called, it's going to print you win, and it's going to get out of the function. Okay? And the final outcome, which we don't need logic around, we don't need any what's called control flow around it. We don't need an if statement, because if this calls, we get out of the function. If this calls, we get out of the function. The only thing left to do if this doesn't get called or if this doesn't get called is to print you lose and return. So let's do this a little bit. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it a bunch of times, and we're just going to call it and see what we can do to mess with it. This is kind of like testing our code, sort of. We will want to write some real tests around it, once we get into our app. But for our purposes here, this is kind of like testing it to make sure that it works. So our function will effectively work for, it'll work best for numbers between 0 and 2, because that's really how you can play rock, paper, scissors. There's only 3 hands you could play. So if we give it a number like 17, which is completely out of bounds, it's actually still going to make us lose. So that's not terrible. That's not a bad scenario, but if we were to write tests and if we were to really need a little bit more security maybe around it, if we're calling some kind of API or third-party service, we would want, when we receive that data back, to know that it's inside our boundaries. So we would want to do some testing around that. But for our purposes here, it doesn't really matter. It's totally fine if the number that we play is out of bounds. We're always going to lose. So you can see we played 17 and the computer played 1. So we lose because our hand, or the number that we played, still is not represented in our winning hands array. But check this out. We played 2 for our first hand. The computer played 0. So we lose. Is that right? Yeah, 2 and 0 is not in that order is not in our winning hands array. So we played 0 and the computer played 0. That's a tie game, obviously. So in this third game, we played 1 and the computer played 0. We win because 1 and 0 in that order is in our winning hands array. And then for this game right here, we played 0 and the computer played 0, another tie game. So that's it. This is working. So what we're going to do next is I'm just going to get you started with building our first actual app. So we're going to do a new project, okay? And we are going to do an iOS with a single view app. That's perfectly fine. We'll hit next. So check it out. This is where we want to get into SwiftUI. We need to make sure that our user interface is SwiftUI right here. So I'm going to call this rock. If I can spell, I would call it rock, roll, paper, scissors. This is the app that we're going to build, okay? And I'm going to have it go to my super secret location, my desktop, and create. So let's take a look at what it gives us, and we will kind of take it from here. I'm going to use this tool called Spectacle to resize things. I can look that up online. It's fun stuff. All right, so we have just basically scaffolded our app, okay? And this is just a bare bones placeholder SwiftUI app. Let's see what happens if we can run it. So I'm going to click this resume. One of the fun things that Apple gave us is the preview right here. I don't have to actually run it in a simulator, which is pretty taxing on your system. I can view it right here. Check it out. So we have import SwiftUI, and it's using a structure. You might want to look up if you've already looked at my beginning Swift for Beginners micro course. You've probably seen something about struct and structures in the Swift types documentation. It would help to get a little bit familiar with that, but effectively, this is the syntax that you'll get used to when you're building with SwiftUI. If you've worked with JavaScript at all, with a framework like React, you'll probably be pretty comfortable in SwiftUI. The only nuances are going to be in the language. So React is going to get you very close to JavaScript. SwiftUI is going to get you really close to Swift. And what I mean by that is if you were to take a JavaScript framework like Angular, Angular sits on top of JavaScript and has a lot of its own Angular-isms. It's a framework that really has its own rules and is opinionated in certain ways. That's totally fine. I'm not saying it's a bad framework or anything like that. But to learn Angular, you need to learn Angular. But what I do like about React is as you're learning React and as you're getting good at using React, you're also getting good at plain JavaScript. Okay, so there's a delineation there, the framework and the language. And I firmly believe that if you're writing really good Swift, or if you're using SwiftUI really well, it's going to kind of take you a little deeper into the language of Swift in a very good way. So I am excited to get going a little bit further. So right now we have a string that says hello world. Let's just say, let's do this. Hello, rock, roll, paper, scissors. Okay, so this is how I'm going to leave you. I'm just going to hit Command S. One other thing I want to do. I'm going to make sure that I have my source code ready to go. So I'm going to go desktop, okay, and let's see what we got. Let's cd into rock and roll paper scissors. So this is initialized with a Git repository. So I'm going to let's see. get status. Great. I've just changed a little bit, so I'm going to get add -a, get commit -m, initialize. This is the hardest part. I can't spell initialize. Initialize rock and roll paper scissors game. Cool. Now, when we pick up on our next lesson, we'll start right here from this commit, and we will branch off and keep going. Thanks for joining me. I hope you'll click that subscribe button and follow along as we build this game together. Thanks a lot.